In today's video, let's talk about a phone that may have a little bit of controversy behind it and what it's capable of, and particularly with its price. This is a phone that is in the budget category. It's a company that has been releasing a yearly revision to this model of budget style phones compared to their high-end ones. And so today we're talking about the Pixel 8a. Does it live up to the budget name? Is it a worthy budget phone, or is it just too expensive still? So let's start off talking about the great things about the new model. And first has to be about the screen and what the screen is capable of now. And that, of course, is 120 hertz refresh rate on an AMOLED screen. This really makes the Pixel A line of series much more modern than that 60 hertz that it was stuck at even with the 6A and 7A. So this alone makes the phone feel much faster, and of course, since Google puts the latest Tensor processors in it, just like their flagships, this of course helps it feel pretty smooth as far as a budget phone goes. Some other nice design elements with it is the metal frame of the phone. A very nice feel to the back with its plastic fill, but a durable, good feeling plastic. And of course the metal on the camera ring or the notch. Even with a little bit thicker bezel than most phones, it's still a nice viewable experience when looking at the front of the phone. And of course, with this phone comes one of its most important pieces that's beyond hardware, and that is 7 years of updates. Is this phone capable of staying up with 7 updates or 7 OS versions? Or would you likely probably replace it before 7 years? Probably so, especially on a budget phone, but it has all the inner workings of still being a great device to last you for several years, especially again with that improved performance and refresh rate. It makes it feel much more like a high-end phone, even though it's in a budget range. Now, of course, your budget range may vary. This is $499 still for this device, which isn't on the cheap side for budget phones, but it's more in the mid-range tier, I would say, as more and more phones go into that area, because the understanding is the chipsets for those low-end budget phones just can't compete at the level that mid-range and high-range can. So that's why Google makes these mid-range devices. But there are problems that come with those mid-range devices, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But of course, being Google, there's way more features that are more software driven than hardware driven. It is a nice looking device, even includes wireless charging now. A little bit slower with only 18-watt wired charging, but again, it's software that comes with any Pixel type of product. And of course, with this being one of the modern Pixel devices, you get some of the new picture features like Best Take, Magic Editor, and Circled Search, and some other ones like the audio recorder. And of course, some of the great calling features like Hold for Me, and of course the automated assistance for answering your calls too for spam or unknown calls. These are all things that really are nice on a Pixel phone that you don't get on a lot of other devices. And a lot of times when I use a Pixel, even an A series, I don't feel like I'm missing out a lot compared to my high-end flagship phone. The OS runs smooth because it's very close to stock, so you get a very enjoyable experience. I've personally had situations where I've had to turn in my high-end phone because of some damage to it, or some mechanism is broke on it, because I like folding phones. That happens often. And so I revert to an 8A a lot. And it's still an enjoyable experience in using this or even 6A or previous A models. And it's not alone just in the enjoyment of the software features. There are great cameras with this as well. The main is a 64 megapixel and the wide is a 13 megapixel and the front is a 13 megapixel. Of course, there's no telephoto. Any of that is done optical or digital zoom. Google has some AI smarts in digital zoom to decrease the noise in the pixels and actually make it somewhat of a usable picture, but it still doesn't overtake the use of an actual optical lens, which of course you only get that on the Pixel Pro models, not even the 8. And that leads into questions about where the 8A and the 8 land. This is where things get a little confusing because there's so many similarities in the 8 and the 8A that becomes a price question. That $50 difference to jump to the 8 and gain a little bit better performance over the 8A really makes it questionable which phone to go with a lot of times. But here's the thing to consider the 8A, and maybe it's more about the timing of when you consider the 8A. And that is, you're likely going to see more discounts on the 8A than you will ever with the 8. Most of the time you're going to see a $50 discount on the 8 and nothing more, maybe around the holidays, but the 8A will drastically reduce in price. There's carrier discounts that get this down to like $150 on a new contract. So there's way more incentives with the 8A to be more cost effective than the 8. So really when it comes down to comparisons, you really have to look at solely the price because everything else between those two models of phones are so comparable that there's not that much of a difference. There are differences, and if we want to go over those, I can do that in a separate video, but for the most part, there's not that much of a difference, especially with this new 8A model getting the higher refresh screen and of course has the Tensor 4 in it. There's not a lot you'll notice, but it'll be a thing depending on when you're looking at a Pixel phone upgrade to really look at each of those models and look at multiple places because you might find that the 8A is significantly lower than the 8, which will be a good purchase overall. But what are some of the bad things about this phone? Because most Pixels that I use, I rarely have any complaints about them. They're just a good, solid, smooth phone. If it's the A series to the Pro series, even to the Fold, even though the Fold had some issues with its first generation, Pixel line in general has such a smooth Android OS and a low bloated OS that it's very smooth a lot of times. So there are a couple things that impact this one that may make your decision a little different. And one of those is battery. Battery could be better. You can definitely make it through a whole day. But the problem I see more is on the charging capabilities. Thankfully it has wireless charging now, but the wired charging is only at 18 watt. This is where I think Google needs to step up the competition now on this and perform better and faster wired charging. I mean, if we look at the comparison of the competition in the $499 range, it's hard some to recommend, especially for charging and overall size and functionality of the device, to maybe even a OnePlus 12R. Now, here's one big hot take on why I still would say the Pixel's better than the 12R. Even though the prices are exactly the same, and you might even be able to get the 12R cheaper, and the 12R has better performance, but you don't get 7 years of OS updates. So if you really want to stay up to date on your Android versions, have the best security, get the most modern updates, monthly update security patches, your Pixel's probably your best bet. But the OnePlus 12R is a very good competitor in this price range. Another thing that I feel that could be better with this is the brightness in direct sunlight. It is fairly bright. You can still visibly see the screen, but we've reached the point where phones have gotten so good outside in direct sunlight that you really don't have a problem at peak brightness. Honestly, a very small nitpick, you may not have this problem. I just feel like it could be a little bit brighter to make it better. And of course, like I said earlier, there's confusion around the pricing and use of the 8A versus 8. I think Google is reaching a point that they need to start assessing the use of these A devices and maybe making or lowering the cost of their 8 line cheaper when each new version of their main line of phone comes out. So for example, when the 9 comes out here in October, maybe lower the cost of the 8 to the cost that the 8A line would typically be. That would put that line in place as your A series, giving some options between the 8A or 8 and 8 Pro as your lower options around that 400, 500 mark range, but still having all the full capabilities, and maybe get away with the A series. The A series is a great model of phone and came in at a time of a need of phones to be a really good budget phone. But we've reached a point with a lot of the mid-range and even Pixel line of phones where it might not really be needed anymore. And hot take, they could do what Apple does and reduce the cost on the previous line to a lower, more budget-friendly cost, since they are using the same processors. This may be an alternative method for Google to take forward, resulting in the, let's say, 9 Pro, and the 9 Fold being their lineup, and the A series would pass on and no longer be an option. But if they continue the A series, I think that's great. I really would wish they could find a way to notch a little bit more of a price distinction, just $50. I feel like that would make the A series more viable when people are just looking at face value of where they can buy, let's say, off the Google store, and they only see a $50 difference. They're probably likely going to go to the 8. Not knowing how similar the devices are, they're probably going to go with the 8, assuming they're getting more out of the 8 over the 8A, which they are, but they are very minor situations. So again, make sure when you're coming to the point of buying either a Pixel 8 or an 8A, if that's the models you're going to go with, price check, because there's likely chances the 8A will be substantially cheaper than what you can get the A for, making it even more of a better deal. Especially check those carriers, or even Google Fi Wireless if you haven't checked them out before. They have a lot of good deals on Pixel devices. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.